In this video, I'll be counting down what I think are the 25 best JRPGs of the 2020s so far. And I want to put a fine point on one thing I just said, what I think. If you've seen any of my videos, you know my tastes are a little weird, so this list is probably not going to go how you think. What have been your favorite JRPGs of the 2020s so far? Drop your favorites in the comments below. And with that said, why don't we just get this thing started at number 25 with Unicorn Overlord. I'm a huge strategy RPG fan and was so thrilled that a game like Unicorn Overlord not only came out, but found big success, selling over 1 million copies. But it's not like most strategy RPGs like Fire Emblem. It has this real-time aspect like classic Ogre Battle. Now, it seemed kind of confusing from the trailers, but after you get into the game and after I played the demo, I was totally addicted. I loved recruiting all the characters, mixing them in my squads to see who was best, and slowly completing each map to find all the different secrets throughout. That said, at a certain point in the game, it becomes a little too easy and I just destroyed everything by the end. And that's mainly why it's not higher, and the story is kind of just whatever. But what's not whatever is that signature Vanillaware art style, and it looks as good as it ever has. It's a shame that Vanillaware's games are never on PC because I feel like they would run and look great on there. I'm a huge fan of tactical RPGs, and Fire Emblem Engage is one of the best I've played in recent memory, definitely of the 2020s. Admittedly, the story is pretty weak in comparison to Three Houses, but it's great where it counts in its gameplay. It brings back interesting level design where positioning actually matters, and it's not just about hitting enemies with your strongest troops until the battle's over. You have to think strategically. What I loved is the Engage mechanic, where you pair characters with past Fire Emblem characters, and they kind of turn into the super character with special abilities, and it creates these really exciting moments in battle that can turn the tide. Now, I know people hated the main character Alir's design, but overall I actually liked the art style in the game. It looks very crisp, really nice, and especially for a Switch game, it just looked really nice and crisp. Arguably one of the best looking Switch games. But the story does keep it relatively low on this list, but other than that, it's fantastic. So if you just love yourself some good old classic strategy RPG gameplay, Engage is one of the best you can play. Now, one game that totally surprised me was Monster Hunter Stories 2. The Monster Hunter series was never really for me, but after I played Monster Hunter World, I was all in. But when it came to the Stories games, I knew it was kind of like Pokemon, but that's about it. But once I dove in, I was totally addicted. And there's two things that it does that kept me personally hooked. First is capturing the different monsters. There's these huge zones all over the place with different monsters, and you can grab their eggs, bring it back to your home base and hatch them, and then you can kind of expand your team. And it was always fun trying different ones out to see how they would behave in battle and how they would turn the tide. And the other thing for me was the gear. Now, of course, Monster Hunter is all about hunting the monsters, getting their parts, making gear, but here, instead of individual pieces, you just make these big sets and you can color them and change how they look. And I absolutely loved doing that with my character. It was so much fun. To say the least, these two features alone had me hooked for dozens and dozens of hours. Sadly, I never totally finished it. The story kind of lost me near the end. However, my fiance did end up playing and beating it and loved it, and I kind of saw how the story wrapped up. Not to mention, I'm pretty excited for Monster Hunter Stories 3, so we'll see how that turns out. Now, while not a JRPG in the traditional sense, I know a lot of JRPG fans play Final Fantasy XIV online. And if you're wanting to take on the most challenging PvE content in the game and learn from the pros, there's no better place to turn than today's sponsor, Overgear. Stop wasting time wiping with random parties in Final Fantasy XIV. If you've ever wanted to clear Savage or even Ultimate but felt held back, Overgear can help. Their professional coaches, players from top guilds, will walk you through everything: raid mechanics, positioning, movement, and even your skill rotation and timings. Instead of guessing, you'll get real feedback, what you're doing wrong and how the best players in the world fix it. You'll pick up pro tips and tricks, learn new fight mechanics, and most importantly, gain the confidence to step into high-end content without the fear of letting your team down. Whether you're chasing clears or just want to sharpen your gameplay, Overgear makes the toughest content in Final Fantasy XIV not only possible, but fun. Click the link in the description, grab a coaching session, and start rating like a pro today. One of my favorite new JRPG franchises of the 2020s has been Scarlet Nexus. It has this awesome dual protagonist story where you can either play as Yuito or Kasane that have more or less the same adventure through the story, but they have different perspectives on the story and you can kind of get different characters in your party. so it's worth playing the game twice. It has this really cool futuristic cyberpunk vibe, and there's these creatures called the Others that come down to Earth and you're trying to stop them. I will say that the game is relatively low because of the story. It was kind of weird, and by the end of the game I just had no idea what was going on. Now the game is not structured like a traditional JRPG, it's more mission based where you pick a mission, you go to a battlefield, you fight some monsters, and then you move on to the next one. But what's cool is you have a party of 3 characters and you have special powers where your main character has psychokinesis. You can kind of pick up items and throw them, anything from just little objects on the ground to giant trains. And as the game goes on, you can also borrow powers from your party members to do some really awesome attacks. And honestly, the combat just feels incredible. Not to mention it has this really cool, slick art style. And if you can, definitely play it on the newer consoles where it can run at 60 frames per second because it looks incredible there. And I have to give a tip of my cap to the sound design in this game because I think it's a totally overshadowed part of an awesome game. Now, one game I was really hyped for initially was Triangle Strategy, but I kind of wanted to love it more than I did. What it does so well is the map design. There's some really unique objectives where you have to do different things, like you have to kind of burn this town down as people are trying to attack you, and you can use your character abilities in really clever ways like making ice walls, poison enemies. There's just some really cool stuff you can do. But the thing about this game is the choice system. At many points in the game, you have to decide what you want to do next, and that totally dictates where the story goes. So if you want to see everything, you have to play the game multiple times. Kind of a neat idea on paper, but I don't know, I kind of just like games where it's one experience and you don't miss anything, because I never went back to play the other story. But I will say I love that HD 2D art style. It looks incredible, awesome music. The voice acting was okay, which is kind of surprising because most of the HD 2D games do have good voice acting. But my big problem with this game was the emphasis on the story. It felt like it was bordering on a visual novel with how much talking there was and over-explaining plot points after it already happened. And in retrospect, there just wasn't that many battles. I mean, I wanted to play more strategy battles, not just sit through some dialogue. It was a good first attempt though, and I hope they get a chance to make a sequel. Now, touching on one of the more recent games, one of the first ones from 2025 is Rune Factory Guardians of Ozma. I am a huge fan of the Rune Factory games, but to be honest, they've never been excellent, but they've gotten so close. Guardians of Ozma is now without question the best in the series. It has a fantastic art style, runs really well, smooth, if not a little easy combat, and there's just lots of things to do in the game. There's 4 separate villages based on different seasons where you go in there and you try to match different villagers with the right jobs like farming or chopping wood or what have you to make your village the best it can be. And you can customize everything by picking up buildings, placing fences, decorations. It's really fun to try to decorate your towns exactly how you want. Not to mention a pretty deep character bonding system in this game, definitely the best in the series, where you can see these really cool character events and also get married if you want to. That said, the ending absolutely drags. I would say it's probably 5 to 10 hours longer than it really needed to be. If it trimmed that, man, this game would be much higher on the list. All in all though, it was still a fantastic game that I'd easily recommend to anyone interested, and I'm really excited to see where the series goes next. Now, probably the first eyebrow raiser on this list is the Dio Field Chronicle, but I can't help it. I just loved this game. It's a real-time strategy RPG where you have a party of 4 characters and there's pretty simple objectives like capture a base or defeat a certain amount of enemies. But I don't know, for me, I was just really hooked on it. There's just a good variety of gameplay where you're doing a battle and then you come back to your base and talk with different characters, and then you maybe do some side quests to kind of level some stuff up. Everything was just quick and snappy and you're just off to the next activity. But I totally understand that it's not for everyone, but I ended up getting the platinum trophy. Now, my absolute favorite character in the game is Waltaquin, and she kind of starts off as this damsel in distress, but as the game goes on, she turns a corner and kind of becomes like the Joker and just invokes all this chaos, and it was so fun and made a rather mundane story into something pretty intriguing. Not to mention she got her own free story DLC that admittedly isn't great, but hey, I'm not gonna balk at free DLC. Now, this is during a time where Square Enix was just kind of dumping all their games at once and it didn't really sell that well, but the ending is absolutely wild, so I'm hoping for a sequel, probably in vain because I doubt we'll ever get one. Now, probably the first surprise on this list is Metaphor Re Fantasia with how low it is, especially because if anybody knows me, I love Persona, but let me explain. I loved the first 30-40 hours of this game. I was really enjoying the gameplay, the story setup was really cool, and the combat is excellent, but for me, I just didn't really connect with any of the characters. Like, they were cool and they had some interesting setup, but when I got into their, social links or I got to know them, I don't know, I was waiting for them to turn a corner and they just kind of bored me. And while the actual art style is good, I feel like they totally overdid it with the UI. I feel like they looked at Persona 5 and went, how do we one up that? And I think they just went over the line with it, because every time you're doing anything in a menu, it just goes over the top in a way that kind of made me nauseous at times. And I think the main difference between Metaphor and Persona for me is that Metaphor is much more grim and kind of sorrowful and has like a more negative vibe, whereas Persona is usually a bit more happy, cheery, and fun. And I don't like games that kind of sit at the bottom and just wallow in sorrow and don't ever come up for fun. And there are some moments like that in Metaphor, but just not as much as I was hoping for. But I gotta hand it to the archetype combat system. It's basically like a job system, and that was by far the best part of the game. Like I said, great game. I respect it. I'm so glad there was a new franchise and it did super well. I just didn't love it as much as other people did. I always love a good underdog story, and man, did I just cheer for Visions of Mana, and it bums me out that it didn't sell particularly well, but I absolutely loved this game. It expands on what Trials of Mana did in so many beautiful ways. There's a bigger world, there's so much to discover and explore, especially with chests all over the place and collecting the grizzly syrup so you can spend it at the vendor and get better items. Not to mention a totally expanded combat system with tons of different classes, and you have these different elements that you can mix and match with different characters. It was so much fun to see which characters had what classes and what worked best. Not to mention they all had different costumes, and I love that in RPGs, so it was really fun to just try out different classes with characters just to see what they looked like. At the beginning it did feel a little slow, but eventually I found some classes that felt really good. Not to mention this game is absolutely gorgeous. It's saturated with so many bright colors. Exploring the world, going to the different towns is just so much fun, and it has this really wonderful, whimsical soundtrack. Now it probably would have been higher, but for me the story didn't land how I wanted. There was some really weird stuff going on in the story, and there was a pretty big twist that I thought they would reverse, but they never did. Not to mention, it's a really big shame that the studio closed. That said, the director did join Square Enix, so maybe we'll get more Mana in the future, but who knows. Now, speaking of Mana, let's talk about another one, Trials of Mana. Now, so many games these days have giant open worlds, and a game like Trials of Mana with a classic design philosophy was just so refreshing. It's a lot more linear and simple. You don't have a ton of side quests or map markers all over the place. You kind of just always know where you're supposed to go. You just follow a little gold star. And don't get me wrong, I love my 60+ hour, 100+ hour epics, but I also welcome 20 to 25 hour ones like Trials of Mana. And one aspect of the story that I thought was really unique and really cool is how you start the game. There's 6 characters that you can choose from, and you pick 3 of them, and those are your party members for the entire game. That's it. You don't find anybody else. You can't mix and match. So that's kind of interesting that you know right away who's going to be in your party, but then it incentivizes you to play a second time because the stories are totally different. But I think what really makes Trials of Mana work is its combat. It's a simple but fun action combat system. It's simple dodge, attack, some super attacks, but then as the game goes on, you can also unlock more classes with different move sets and different costumes. Again, I love different costumes, so it was really cool to see the different ones that unlock throughout the game. Not to mention, it looks incredible. Now, I originally played this on PlayStation 4 and it only ran at 30 frames per second. I would love if this got a remaster, or I might even pick it up on PC one day to have it run at 60, because that would be incredible. But this game overall is just fun, simple, and a fantastic remake, and one of the best I've played. Admittedly, I'm not the biggest Xenoblade fan, even though I've beat all of them, but for Xenoblade 3, there was just something about this game that resonated with me. Something about all the different characters having only 10 years to live, and they're constantly wrestling with their own mortality and what they want to do before their life is over. And as someone that's turning 40 this year, that really resonated with me and kept me hooked as I played. Now, one look at the combat UI and it's a big mess, and it's like, where do I even look? But weirdly enough, as I played the game, that kind of just disappeared, and I just played the game and didn't even really bother with that. I more looked at positioning and alerts, and I loved all the different classes and trying out different combinations and trying on different outfits. Love that, like I said before. And man, is this open world absolutely gigantic and fun to explore. Now, this might sound like a weird drawback, but for me, what kept it from being higher was the length. Now, I know a lot of people like their games to be really, really long, but I just don't have as much time to play games these days. So for it being 100+ hours, I don't know, it just kind of wore a little thin by the end. Not to mention the visuals look not that great on Nintendo Switch. It's stranded, so I'm hoping we get a Switch 2 port at some point. But this is easily my favorite in the series, and I'm looking forward to whatever Monolith does next. Square Enix definitely has something really special with their HD 2D art style, and I absolutely fell in love with it in this particular game, Star Ocean: The Second Story R. That art style absolutely took my breath away. Every time I visited a new town, I wanted to go in every little house, explore every corner, because it was so beautiful. Not to mention a really compelling story with super fun characters, very classic throwback JRPG. I mean, it came out during the PlayStation 1 era, so of course it's going to be there, and that's my bread and butter. But they added so many quality of life design choices, like asking if you want to equip new gear, fast travel, tons of new skills, and this sort of really cool call-in mechanic where you have throwback characters from other games in the series. Now, what held this game back from being really high on the list, maybe even top 10, were a couple really bad dungeons, particularly one near the end of the game where you're stepping on these different portals with different colors and you're trying to figure out where you're supposed to go. I'm not even kidding, I almost quit the game at that point, but I'm glad I didn't because I saw it through to the end and it was totally worth it. If you like JRPGs, whether you like retro ones or modern ones, I think this fits a nice balance and you absolutely need to play it. Man, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin I think is overly hated and criminally underrated. Now, it's pegged as a sort of reimagining of the original Final Fantasy, but that's really stretching it. In a lot of ways, this is more of like a Neo or Souls-like game where you pick a level, you go through, there's some different little enemies, and then there's a big boss fight at the end. It's challenging but fair. It's not going to be like this super try-hard thing. I'm not the greatest at games, I've beaten Bloodborne and Elden Ring, but I think this game was definitely easier than those. But really, it relies more on parrying and blocking. But to me, why it's on this list is the combat. It feels so good. I loved trying out all the different classes that you would think might not even work in a Final Fantasy game with this speed of action, but you play like the white mage, you don't just sit there and heal, you can actually attack, and it's super fun. I actually ended up playing the DLC and a lot of the post-game content, and man, this game is just so much fun. I know it's not for everyone, but I absolutely had a blast with it. My advice is just skip the story unless you really want to partake in the cringe and just enjoy the gameplay because it's excellent. Super Mario RPG is one of the best remakes of all time. It kept what was great in the original game and added what was needed. And man, this game is just oozing with charm out of every single corner, from the visuals to the sound effects and that music. Oh my god, the music is so good from composer Yoko Shimomura. I know a lot of people will play video games these days with like a podcast or something on, but playing this game without the sound is borderline criminal. It totally transforms the game experience. Now, I will say it's very streamlined, very linear. I always knew where I was supposed to go, and the game is almost laid out like a Mario game with this sort of overworld, and it tells you where you're supposed to go, but there was room for secrets and places to explore, which I also found fun. Now, this is the game that originated that timing-based, turn-based combat where you have to press a button right before you attack or right before someone attacks you. But in this game, it added this gauge, and the more it filled up, you could do these big triple attacks with your full party with these really cool animations, and I loved seeing all of those. I will say the platforming sections were a little bit iffy because it has this isometric angle and it's kind of hard to see where you're supposed to go, but other than that, I think it's a fantastic game. I can totally see why it's considered one of the best retro JRPGs and by far one of the best remakes of all time. And speaking of amazing JRPG remakes, I had to include Trails in the Sky First Chapter. Now, I'll be honest with you, I had another game and I actually took it out because Trails in the Sky was that good that it had to be on this list, and I knew I'd hear about it in the comments if I didn't have it in there. Now, this is arguably one of, if not the best JRPG remake I've ever played. The game has been lovingly remade in these gorgeous visuals. Now it's in fully 3D, runs at 60 frames per second on PlayStation 5 when I played, and apparently up to 120 frames per second if you have a monitor that can support that. And another amazing addition to this remake is it's fully voiced in English. The voice acting breathes new life into these characters and makes them feel alive like never before. All the performances are amazing, and I absolutely fell in love with this cast. Of course, with the main characters Joshua and Estelle, but also the entire supporting cast, with Olivier being a particular favorite of mine. And I can't talk about the amazing additions to this game without talking about the brand new combat system that they pulled from Daybreak. No longer is the game simple turn-based combat across grids, but it's a mix of simple action combat that you can then transition to dynamic turn-based combat. And this is all about positioning and area of effect damage, and it's super fun. Maybe my favorite combat system in any game, period. Plus, the game added a high speed mode that you can toggle on and off. So if you want to run between towns or just speed up combat when you're fighting trash enemies, you can really just blaze through this game. Now, I'll admit, I've never been the biggest Trails fan, but this game made me a believer. It was amazing from beginning to end, and I'll be waiting yet again for Sky's second chapter, but hopefully we won't need to wait 4+ years this time. Now, before we get into the top 10, be sure to drop this video a like. It helps more than you know, and consider subscribing if you like JRPG content just like this. Now we're getting serious. Moving into the top 10, we have one of the biggest surprises of the decade so far, and that is Chained Echoes. On the surface, it looks like every other 16-bit throwback JRPG, but it is so much more. It has this really unique combat system where it has this overdrive bar where anytime you attack, it moves up. Anytime you use an item or block, it kind of goes down, and you want to stay in this green zone because you can do more damage and take less damage, but if you go over, then you'll take more damage and you won't do as much damage. It keeps battles engaging instead of just mashing the most powerful attack over and over again. And it really invites you to explore with huge environments, big towns, looting houses, talking to people, and finding secrets. Definitely one of my favorite things to do in games. Not to mention an incredible presentation. The art style, well, yes, it is a 16-bit style game. I think it's even more detailed, like the characters have more pixels to them, the animation is really smooth, and that music is absolutely incredible. I think the reason why it's so high is it just felt fresh. I mean, over the years, I've played a lot of JRPGs, and sometimes they all kind of meld together in my head over the course of a year or a decade. So it takes something really high quality to stand out, and this does both. For those that only play a handful of JRPGs a year, might not find it as refreshing. I get it, but for me, it did. And it's really impressive that most of this game was only made by one guy. And also there was some DLC recently released, so this game just keeps on giving. If you have not played Chained Echoes yet, man, go correct that immediately because it's incredible. Tales of Arise has garnered a weird amount of hate since its release, but I still think it's an absolutely incredible game. First of all, this game is just stupidly beautiful. The environments are gorgeous and super detailed. I loved exploring every inch of it. And the character designs are fantastic. I love looking at their different outfits, and they all look so unique. And speaking of which, this is probably my favorite cast of characters in any game in the Tales series. They all had so much depth and reasons for going on this adventure. Personally, I loved watching Alfred and Shion's relationship grow. Shion went from this total ice princess thanks to her thorns to being vulnerable by the end of the game. Now, I will admit that the story kind of fell apart near the end, but overall, I really enjoyed the story. But what really grabbed me was the gameplay. Of course, it has that awesome action combat system. It's super dynamic where you can call characters in, you can switch characters out, and each character felt so different, and it almost felt like a totally different game each time you play a different character. And outside of combat, everything ties together in really cool ways. You're incentivized to explore because you find these owls throughout the world, and depending on how many owls you find, you then unlock outfits for your characters, and that's a common theme I'm sure you're picking up. So it was really fun to get all these different outfits for my characters and see what they all looked like. And in fact, I loved playing this game so much that I ended up getting the Platinum Trophy. Now, of course, Tales of Arise certainly isn't without its flaws, but this seems to be the game that put the series back on the map, winning Best RPG at the Game Awards back in 2021. And here's hoping they continue to refine the series further and make the next game even better. Now, in years past, I probably would have had Final Fantasy VII Remake higher, but with time and letting the nostalgia bomb settle, its flaws become a little more prevalent, but don't get me wrong, it's still an incredible game. For context, the original Final Fantasy VII is one of my favorite games of all time, and to see it so lovingly recreated filled me with so much joy. I loved simply walking around Midgard to soak in the familiar locales like the Wall Market or Seventh Heaven, and I loved getting to know my favorite video game characters all over again. In particular, I enjoyed Barrett and Aerith like I never have before. Like in the original game, I didn't really care about them, but in here, their characters are incredible. Square Enix breathed new life into this world in ways I never thought possible. Here in this game, there were more than polygonal caricatures. They felt real. They have passions, fears, and motivations that come through in more believable ways than in almost any game I've ever played. And actually playing Final Fantasy VII Remake was a blast as well. Trash mobs are fun because you have to actually think about how you want to stagger them. You don't just mindlessly pick attacks from a menu. And the bosses were on a whole nother level. They were so epic, and the music absolutely matches it in incredible ways. Now, I will admit that there were a lot of sequences that felt padded and were stretched to their breaking point, and this game is really taking what was originally a 3 to 4 hour section and stretching it to 30 to 40 hours, so I get that they had to do that a little bit. But regardless, this is still an amazing first step in this trilogy. Now, speaking of remakes, we have to talk about Persona 3 Reload. Now, I have a confession to make. I've never beat the original Persona 3. I got really far. In fact, I got to the final boss, but I just could not beat them because in the original Persona 3, you can't control your party, not to mention a weird fatigue mechanic. But the remake fixes all of this and so much more. Obviously, the update to modern visuals and that signature Persona flair is amazing. Being able to explore this world in fully 3D and not just being a dot on a screen like in the PSP version was incredible. They did their best to make Tartarus tolerable, but it's still admittedly pretty bland and boring. I will say I felt like it was much easier, like I didn't need to grind as much. Obviously without the fatigue mechanic, I can kind of blast through dungeons a lot faster. And I noticed that by the end of the game, I had a lot of extra days that I was just skipping through or just kind of doing random social links because I had nothing else to do. That said though, man, that Persona game loop still holds up and is addictive as ever. Not to mention the remix tracks sound amazing and the new VO cast was pretty much perfect. Outside of Akihiko, he sounded a little bit off, but other than that, everyone sounded exactly like they should. Persona is my favorite gaming series, and I'm happy to see this amazing remake just like this to a game I never finished, and I cannot wait to see what they do with Persona 4 Revival because the original Persona 4 is my favorite game of all time, so I have pretty high expectations. We had to wait a really long time for Granblue Fantasy Relink, and it's hard to live up to that much hype, but in my opinion, of all the games we had to wait that long for, I feel like Granblue Fantasy absolutely delivered. But it's not exactly what I expected or I think what a lot of people expected. It's not a traditional JRPG where you go town hopping, it's more quest-based and set-piece heavy. Think Monster Hunter meets Uncharted. But I love both of those franchises, so I was all in on this game. And each story quest is so wildly different. In one, you have just killing monsters, you're trying to beat them, get through the level. And the next, you have this giant titan shooting lasers everywhere and you're trying to climb it. And another, you're storming an airship trying to take it down so it doesn't take you down. Not to mention tons of other unique ones that I don't want to spoil. And here's the thing I like about the main story, it's all killer, no filler. It's pretty short, maybe around 12 hours, but it is jam-packed. But what's cool is you can keep playing for dozens and dozens of hours after the credits roll because more story quests unlock, there's different harder versions of bosses, and you can just keep going for as long as you want to. Not to mention there are so many characters. There's like 20 plus very different characters, not to mention all the ones they added post-launch, but my personal favorite was Fairy. She has these whips and she summons these sort of ghost animals that can fight on her behalf, and her combat loop was just really fun. Not to mention it has an absolutely incredible art style. It ran at 60 frames per second on PS5, silky smooth, and it has a pretty amazing soundtrack. What's nice is this went on to sell over 2 million copies, and I do hope it sold well enough for Cygames' expectations to consider a sequel because man, I would be there day one. Now, it might be really surprising for you guys to see Ys 9 this high on the list, but allow me to explain. First off, I'll admit that the story isn't super strong. It can be slow at times, especially the prison sections when you're trying to escape, although there is a pretty crazy twist that I won't spoil that makes the story worth experiencing. But for me, there are fewer games on this list that I had more fun playing than Ys 9. As always for the series, the action is silky smooth and so satisfying with that 3-party combat system where you kind of swap with different weaknesses that the enemies have, so you have to kind of keep swapping to make sure you have the right one. And honestly, all the characters were super fun, but my personal favorite was the doll. She kind of moves on these roller skates and she has very acrobatic movesets, and I don't know, I just really enjoyed playing as her. Now, the unique game mechanic here in Ys 9 are the gifts. Basically, these are different ways you can explore environments, like gliding off a high ledge, running up walls, zipping to spots, and so much more. This made something as simple as navigating the world absolutely thrilling. These made for the most enjoyable experience collecting collectibles. Otherwise, those are pretty boring, but it was really fun to run up walls and find secret walls to try to find absolutely everything. And I ended up getting the Platinum Trophy because I wanted to do everything this game had to offer. And man, we cannot forget about that rockin' soundtrack by JDK Band. When you're fighting enemies and they're absolutely shredding, it's just pure gaming bliss. And the other thing that's really nice about it is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. At around 25 hours, I feel like that's the perfect length for a game like this. I hate when games waste my time, so here, all killer, no filler, absolutely loved Ys 9. Now, as I was filling out my top 5 for this list, it was tough to figure out, but whenever I think of Sakura Wars, I immediately get this happy feeling and a smile on my face, so it had to be there. Something about the amazing characters, or the music, or the fun action combat. There are a few games on this list that gave me an immediate reaction like Sakura Wars did, so it had to be here. I think the selling point of this game is the story, though. All the 5 main characters are so unique and have these really endearing personalities, whether it's like the really cute childhood friend character in Sakura, or kind of the tomboyish Hatsuho. They all have really different personalities, and it's so fun to get to know them through the different sections. And while there is combat sections, most of this game is sort of like an adventure style game where you're going around talking to different characters, making choices, and what you say can impact kind of who you fall in love with by the end of the game. Now, a lot of times they're not though. You can just say something to get a hilarious reaction, and man, there are a lot of funny moments in this game. And like some other games on this list, I wanted to see everything this game had to offer. I think I ended up replaying it about 4 or 5 times, and I got the platinum trophy, and it was so fun every single minute. Now, I did mention this before, but there is action combat, and you drive these big mechs, and it's kind of a Dynasty Warriors style combat system where there's a bunch of enemies on screen and you're kind of mowing them down. But for me, I had a blast with it. The two best characters by far are Anastasia and Hatsuho. Anastasia has this gun and she's good from range, but Hatsuho has this like flaming hammer and can take out enemies, and she's just a blast. And I can't talk about Sakura Wars without mentioning that incredible main theme. It's been stuck in my head for years. If you hear it, it'll be stuck in your head for years, so be warned. Now, I know it didn't sell super well, but I'm hoping this isn't the last we've seen of the series because 2026 is the 30th anniversary, so who knows, maybe we'll get something. One of my favorite new franchises is Octopath Traveler, and Octopath Traveler 2 is definitely the better of the two games. In a lot of ways, it's pretty much the same game, but also improved in a lot of dramatic ways. Of course, it has that incredible HD 2D art style, that dynamic turn-based combat system, but in Octopath Traveler 2, it adds just a few extra little flares to put it over the top. There's now a day-night cycle, and the game looks absolutely gorgeous at night. It released outside of just the Nintendo Switch, so it runs at 60 frames per second, and the combat system also has this special ability for each characters that give each class a dynamic twist. But I think the biggest improvement, and one of the reasons why this game is so high on the list, is the writing. Way more of the characters in this game have interesting stories that I wanted to see to the very end. And they also added opportunities for the characters to actually interact. Personally, my favorites in this game were Throne, Agnia, and Hikari. I couldn't wait to see how all their different stories ended, but for me, I think Agnia was my absolute favorite. I love those touching, heartwarming stories, and hers of trying to live up to her mom as a performer was just so cute and sweet, and I love that one. Now, a lot of people complain that the story still doesn't really connect in a better way overall, and I totally understand that complaint, but for me, I just didn't care. In Octopath Traveler 2, I could just pick the stories I want, finish the ones that I wanted, and the ones that I didn't enjoy, I can just leave and it's totally fine. And I'm glad to see that the series is continuing this year with Octopath Traveler 0, and man, I cannot wait to see what goes on with that story and where the series goes next. I remember seeing the reveal trailer for Expedition 33 and thinking it looked incredible, but I never expected it would have been this good. It's a completely fresh take on the genre with dynamic turn-based combat, an emotionally gripping story, an incredible cast of complex characters, and an absolutely stunning soundtrack. What begins as essentially a suicide mission to try and defeat the enigmatic paintress responsible for killing generations of people transforms into something you'll never see coming. But what makes it so good are the characters. There's so many incredible performances, they're so well written, and they just felt human and real. And a lot of the characters obviously are dealing with their own mortality and are willing to do whatever it takes to stay alive. But what's great about Expedition 33 is it doesn't just sit and stew in the dire atmosphere. It knows how to keep things light and crack jokes and be silly. So I feel like it does a perfect balance of all these different emotions. But this is a game, and what keeps it going and what makes it never feel boring is that incredible combat system. It's timing based, where you have to do these timed button presses depending on which attack you're doing, not only on offense, but on defense. You can either parry and do damage back to the enemy or just dodge. And each character has a unique gimmick, and so it was really fun to experiment with them, build them exactly how I wanted, and kind of break the game in some fun ways. Not to mention that hauntingly beautiful soundtrack, whether it be the main theme, walking around environments, or in the turn-based combat. Overall, Expedition 33 was an absolutely incredible experience. I fully expected to sweep the Game Awards this year, but hey, stranger things have happened. Now, you probably could have guessed this, but honestly, no other game really came close to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It is simply one of the greatest games I've ever played. I lost count of how many times I said to myself while playing it, how is this game real? Everything from the scope, the production value, and the quality of the game are unlike anything I'd seen before. And all of this in a game that reimagines one of my all-time favorites, made for a truly special experience. Every time I got to a new location, I wanted to explore every corner of it to see what had changed and what had stayed the same. And honestly, no section failed to impress me except maybe that lame Shinra Mansion section with Kate Sith. Each zone was brimming with fun activities and unique minigames. Some people thought I was a little bit overkill, but honestly, we've been missing fun side minigames in Final Fantasy, so I welcomed it. Not to mention Queen's Blood, which I completely lost myself in and got all the way to the end of that quest line. And the music, oh my god, that music. Absolutely incredible stuff. One of the best gaming soundtracks of all time. And this game made me feel such a range of emotions. You know, games are fun, but I haven't had a game's story truly move me, and I don't know how long like Rebirths did. It put me through every emotion from sadness, confusion, excitement, thrill. I mean, it just did absolutely everything. And when a game can move you like that, that's when you know it's special. Simply put, it's my favorite JRPG and favorite game of this decade, and outside of the inevitable third game in this remake trilogy, I don't see anything unseating it. Now, these are some absolutely fantastic games, but if you want to see some bad ones that you should avoid, check out this video next.